Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries.
Welcome, friends. This is Dane Rome, your announcer for today's Last Days Beacon program. Thanks for listening, and thank you for joining us. Just a reminder that these programs are supported by your gifts to this ministry. If you'd like to contribute to this ongoing faith ministry, which deals with biblical prophecy and current events, simply go to our website to contribute. Our website address is www.swpm.us. You'll find a donate link on the homepage. The website address again is www.swpm.us. Thank you for your prayers and support for this faith ministry. On today's program, Dr. Schnitger continues his discussion with prophecy expert Bill Salus. Bill is one of the leading authors and speakers on Bible prophecy in our day, and is a headliner at prophecy conferences across the country. He's just finished a brand new book and DVD entitled Apocalypse Road, Revelation for the Final Generation. This amazing book and DVD deals with events that will take place after the rapture and before the tribulation. This is an important yet neglected subject that you'll find very fascinating. Let's join them for today's dialogue.
Thank you, Dane. It is a great privilege to have Bill Salus on the broadcast throughout the month of July to discuss his latest book and DVD entitled Apocalypse Road. Bill is one of the leading prophecy scholars in our day and is a headliner at prophecy conferences across America. In fact, he and I will be sharing a billing at the first annual Blessed Hope Prophecy Forum in October of this year. God has gifted Bill, I believe, with an ability to discern Bible prophecy and, more importantly, to relate it to the day in which we live in a manner that moves the hearts of people. So, Bill, it is a real honor to have you on the show today via long distance, and welcome back to our second program today.
Thanks, David. Yes, it's great. Well, now we'll kind of get into the meat of the Apocalypse Road book. What happens after the rapture, but before the tribulation, which is really that gap of time, vastly overlooked, that I try to cover in Apocalypse Road. Book 2 of the series, Tribulation Road, which will follow, will take the reader into the actual 7 years of tribulation. But we're not going there in these next couple programs. We're going to park ourselves and explore what happens after the rapture and the immediate aftermath.
Well, let me say, Bill, as I mentioned in last week's program, this is unexplored territory. I'm a good dispensationalist, a good Schofield dispensationalist. And, the charts that I have seen, whether it be Clarence Larkin or Tommy Ice, you get this impression that as soon as the Lord comes in the air, as 1 Thessalonians 4 talks about, and we are raptured, we're caught up to be with the Lord, as soon as that happens, before the dust settles, the ink begins to dry on this peace treaty that Daniel chapter 9 talks about. And I've never really given it too much thought, although when I did I was just somewhat uncomfortable. And there's always been this controversy, at least in my reading, about, might there be events, biblical prophetic events, that take place between these two events? But my dispensational charts did not allow for that, as if these are inspired. And so I'm glad that you've blown this subject wide open and really freed us perhaps from man's thinking and constrictions, in terms of time. And of course, we believe that God is eternal and time is no problem for him. He's not in a rush in terms of accomplishing his prophetic purpose. So I think when you allow for this gap or interstitial period between the rapture and the commencement of the tribulation, of course, we know the event that actually begins that, Daniel's 70th week, then that really gives us some flex room, some comfort room to really give full credit to some of these prophetic passages that we're not exactly sure what to do with. So let me just open it wide up and for you to share what you think happens in this Apocalypse Road period.
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, this gap is not a new invention of mine. I mean, Dr. David Reagan, Tim LaHaye, and several other top Bible prophecy scholars have mentioned that they do believe there's a gap. The reasoning behind that is that, like you mentioned, it's not the rapture of the church that immediately triggers the 7 years of tribulation. It's the confirmation of a false covenant identified in Daniel 9:27, confirmed by the Antichrist between Israel and some other party known as the Many. And I identify who the Many are in the Apocalypse Road book. That's what triggers the 7 years of tribulation. Whatever the true content on what we commonly call that the false covenant, whatever that true content is, it is so bad. It prompts the final 7 years of the worst times on the Earth's history. And so, and that time is rapidly approaching. So, as far as what happens, yes, this gap we don't know. It's an unspecified period of time. It could be that when the Antichrist is sitting down at a table with his pen in hand and Israel is about ready to be signatory on this false covenant, that God says to Jesus, go get your bride. That could be the case, and thus there would be little to no gap. But as I put forward in the book, there are many reasons to suspect that's not the case. And when the rapture happens, that doesn't necessarily concern Israel to the point where they say, we need to run around and sign some sort of peace agreement to protect our national security. I mean, the rapture is irrelevant, really, with respects to Israel's future. Something has to happen after the rapture that compels Israel to protect itself from what's taking place in the world, to protect its national security. And we find out in Isaiah 28 exactly what that is. There's an overflowing scourge Isaiah will be talking about that we'll get into on your program that is sweeping throughout the world, being perpetrated by culprits called death and Sheol. We're going to preface on who are they. We'll read those verses throughout your programs. And that's what Israel's concerned about, not the rapture. So, what we're going to talk about, we'll actually identify some of these prophecies that are going on, but the main thing right now is listen, the church is going to be raptured. David and I, we are pre-trib rapture believers. We believe that Jesus could come and get us at any given time as the bride of Christ. And then, and if that could happen, let's say that happened in the very, very near future, within the next few weeks, we'll even say. That means people we know and love who have not accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior, members in our sphere of influence, maybe as close as a spouse or a family member, a child, a grandchild, or a neighbor, a work comrade, they're going to be plunged into this gap. So we need to explore that. What is in this gap, and how long could it be? And do we have biblical clues about that? And can people get saved after the rapture? That's another big question that comes up. There are people right now teaching that if you've heard the gospel and not accepted Christ, and then the rapture happens, you have missed your window of opportunity to get saved. You would be condemned from that point forward. And I think that question needs to be addressed, because many noted individuals are teaching that. And it's concerning many people who have loved ones who have not accepted Christ but have heard about the gospel. And so we want to tackle these subjects. We do this in Apocalypse Road, and then we want to get into what happens in the gap and how it sequences itself, and what are the arguments for that.
Well, there's a passage in Scripture that may contribute to this misunderstanding. It just came to my mind. I think it's in Hebrews, where it says, "It is appointed unto man once to die, and then the judgment." So I think the Bible is very clear that once a person passes from this mortal life into eternity, that there is no second chance for those individuals. And perhaps that kind of thinking is translated to those who would teach that once the rapture takes place, if you've heard the gospel and rejected it, there is no hope for you. So, Bill, what would be some reasons that you think of from the Scriptures as to why God does extend His grace and mercy beyond the rapture to those who have not yet trusted Christ.
Right, and that that verse you quoted is dealing. It certainly shoots holes in the concept of reincarnation, doesn't it, David? If you die and then you're going to judgment, at that point there's no coming back.
Right.
There's no
or the doctrine of purgatory. So some of these non-Christian doctrines are really dealt with very clearly in that particular verse.
Right. However, what we're talking about is people who have not died, that get left behind. They do face dire consequences, and we find out many people become believers after the rapture, and they are martyred. But what we're talking about when these people suggest that there's no second chance for people who have heard the gospel prior to the rapture to get saved subsequently, we're not talking about, they don't go to that Hebrews passage. They go typically to 2 Thessalonians 2. And that's pretty much where they put most of their entire argument. And so I personally do believe there's a second chance after the rapture. And I put forward many arguments in the book as to what they are. So you mentioned that. Let's go ahead and talk about those arguments at this point. But let's be clear what we're talking about and how severe this is. Basically, what we're talking about at this segment of your show is that if you're concerned Jesus could come get his bride at any given moment, you would say, okay, I don't want my loved one to be left behind. I want to introduce them to the gospel. But I'm a little concerned because I've been hearing these teachers say that if I don't do it effectively, and he hears the gospel but doesn't make a decision for Jesus Christ, procrastinates or rejects it, whatever the case may be, I have just condemned that loved one to no second chance. They will actually go to hell. So do I give them the gospel? Don't I give them the gospel? I don't want to give them the gospel and then I'm caught up in the air, and as I'm waving goodbye to them, going, "Oh no, I shouldn't have given you the gospel because now you're going to go to hell because you didn't accept Christ before." That's the brevity of what we're talking about. So, the concerns I've got is one. First of all, I'm going to give you 7 quick reasons, and these are all outlined in the Apocalypse Road book. First of all, salvation is part of God's loving plan. He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, to the world to die for our sins, that whoever would believe in Him would not perish, but would have everlasting life. God is love. We find this out throughout the entire Bible. It is against His very character to say, hey, listen, you're a select group. You should have got it before the rapture. You don't have a second chance. Also, the rapture is an amazing evangelistic event. I mean, when people see their loved ones have departed with the common denominator that those were believers in Christ, that is going to be an amazing witnessing tool. And also, multitudes of people are getting saved after the rapture. They show up all over the place. Good sealed saints in Revelation 6. You see them in Revelation 7. They say they come out of the Great Tribulation. The 144,000 Jewish witnesses obviously get saved after the rapture. The Jewish remnant, the Iranian remnant, there's all kinds of Gentile remnants that get saved after. So it's not as if people don't get saved afterwards. Also, the many people who hear about the gospel that don't accept Christ, and you can imagine, we don't know how many that will be, but let's assume there's several million people that will have heard the gospel but get left behind. It only takes one of them to drop to their knees and accept Christ and get saved to nullify the entire you don't get a second chance view. Now, if someone's sitting across the table from their mother and she gets raptured and they're aware that she's taught the gospel and she's looking for Jesus to come get her in the rapture, you don't think that individual is going to be inclined to catch what happened and to accept Christ? So one exception is all it takes to nullify the entire view out of the millions that will have probably been left behind that have heard the gospel. Also, there's a gap between the rapture and the point of no return. So in other words, it's not the rapture that creates this so-called point of no return where people can, experience wrath of God, lose their salvation. It's a process. It's not as if God says, okay, the rapture had happened, let's put blinders on this certain group of people because they've upset me because they didn't get the gospel, they didn't get the accept Christ when they heard the good news about Jesus Christ. Listen, I myself took 4 or 5 times hearing the gospel before I came back, so before I accepted Christ.
It took me 5 years, Bill. So God is very
so
patient, very patient.
A God of second, third, fourth, fifth, how many times chances, right? I mean, how many times did he tell Peter to turn the other cheek? 7 times 70, I believe it was. But and then also the text of 2 Thessalonians 2, which is what they gravitate toward, it doesn't clearly support the view of what they're saying there. And also the timing in the context of 2 Thessalonians 2 really, absolutely, in my estimation, does not even support that view. And so they've got to find other scriptures for me to give it any merit, and they've got to answer these questions. I've sent these responses to some of these people, and they have really not even been able to respond to any of my arguments. So I want to encourage your listeners who have a loved one that you're concerned about is going to get left behind, and they've been taught the gospel, or have not heard the gospel yet. Give them the gospel. Continue to remind them of it. And we're not saying thump them over the head with the Bible, but every opportunity God gives you, tell them about the good news of Jesus Christ. Don't be threatened that you're not Billy Graham. You got to do it a certain way. No, tell them the good news about Jesus Christ. And if they don't accept Christ, they will have a second chance after the rapture.
Absolutely. I think of I visited the little rock city of Petra back in 1977. And I heard subsequently that a Bible Society has stored millions of Bibles in the caves in that rock city, anticipating that perhaps this might be the place of Israel's refuge during the Great Tribulation. So this is an example of forward-thinking people who recognize the grace of God extends into this interim period as well as throughout the tribulation, and that God is not willing that any should perish. I think that you're giving these reasons, Bill, will help relieve the quandary that many believers might face, that you express so well. The idea, well, maybe I shouldn't witness to my lost loved ones because they will not have a chance after the rapture. That is, I think you've given 7 good reasons why that is not the case. And really, when you look at the narrative in the book of Revelation, we see what perhaps is the world's greatest revival and inpouring of souls into the kingdom that take place during the tribulation. Why would we be surprised that does not ramp up in this gap period, even before the tribulation begins? To me, it helps answer the question, how do we see early on in the tribulation period the multitude of saints? And this gap period gives us some additional time to see, a fresh working of God's Spirit, bringing to faith perhaps those who had heard the gospel before but were reluctant or tardy about it, and then perhaps the rapture itself is the event that seals the deal for them, that brings them to that eternal decision. So I think these are...
Well,
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may, David, a couple things. You'd mentioned, the forward thinking with the Bibles in Petra for the faithful Jewish remnant. One of the themes of the Bible is there will be a faithful Jewish remnant. Zechariah 13:9 says there will be about a third of the Jewish population at that time will become a remnant. And a lot of them will come to know about Christ through the 144,000 witnesses in Revelation chapter 7, who come on the scene after the rapture, as we understand the chronology of the events. And I have a hard time thinking to myself that those people, if they're alive on the scene today, and I believe they could be, we're into the final generation for all intents and purposes, it appears. I have a hard time thinking that they have not heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. I mean, we're talking about a bunch of Apostle Paul's probably running around. We could be talking about tour bus drivers in Israel presently who know more about the New Testament than their Christian tourists, or a Hebrew university teacher, professor who knows the Old Testament with his eyes closed. So, that's one thing. But I want to be real clear to your listeners. I'm not advocating that you soft pedal this topic because even though they have a second chance, in my estimation, after the rapture, there's a high degree of likelihood, which we'll be covering in the next subsequent shows, that they may not make that right choice, because it will not be a popular choice. There'll be supernatural deception outsourced by Satan that will be unrestrained, and that will cost them their lives. There's all kinds of martyrdom, the Fifth Seal saints and others. So we encourage you to introduce the gospel to them now because you do not want them to be left behind. And matter of fact, I write, as we kind of conclude this segment, David, I think we're getting down to this podcast ending here, but I say in Apocalypse Road, I say many readers will get raptured as true believers of Jesus Christ before this gap period commences. The good news is that they will not personally face the frightening events that are forthcoming in the gap period. The bad news is that someone they love will. This work has been specifically designed to stimulate the mind and pulsate the heart of believers and to invigorate their love for the lost. Careful consideration in that regard has gone into the overall content of this entire composition. If you are concerned about the eternal destiny of an unsaved loved one, then consider Apocalypse Road as your invaluable guidebook for these last days. The biblically supported scenarios within this book will embolden you to share the good news about Jesus Christ with the ones you love.
Amen. On our broadcast tomorrow, we're going to get into some more details, really dig into this gap period and some of these amazing prophecies that have perhaps been misunderstood or neglected through the years that I think will be coming to life in the next few years, perhaps. So we're out of time for today. Bill, thanks for coming back on the broadcast today. And next week, we will dig into some of these events that are contained in the Apocalypse Road. And I think you'll find this to be a fascinating discussion, my friends. We've been talking with Bill Salus today about his amazing new book and DVD entitled Apocalypse Road. This book and DVD constitutes a final warning to the final generation. It's a message that perhaps some of your friends and family members needs to hear. I'm sure you will want to have both resources, the book and companion DVD, to share with family and friends. And now I'm going to turn it over to our announcer, Dane Rome, who will tell you how you can obtain the book and DVD entitled Apocalypse Road.
Thank you, Dr. Schnitker. Dear friends, this month we're featuring an excellent book and DVD entitled Apocalypse Road, Revelation for the Final Generation. This is book 2 of an end times trilogy that attempts to chronologically order the biblical prophecies that occur between now and the second coming of Christ. Apocalypse Road covers the prophecies that seemingly happen in the interval between the rapture and the 7-year tribulation period. These events include the Gog and Magog invasion of Israel, prophesied in Ezekiel 38, the formation of the global world religion called Mystery Babylon, the ride of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the arrival of the Antichrist, the martyrdom of the 5th seal saints, the revealing of the 144,000 Jewish witnesses, the identity of the 2 witnesses, and much more. This book combines a novel with a biblical commentary, 2 books in one format. If you enjoyed the Left Behind books, you'll appreciate the biblical explanations provided in Apocalypse Road. The book contains helpful maps and is over 400 pages long. For those who prefer, there's also a DVD containing information that's over 100 minutes long. Apocalypse Road is the final warning to the final generation to get right with the Lord now before it's too late. The book is available for a gift of $19.95 plus shipping and handling. The DVD is also available for $15.95 plus shipping and handling. We have a special combination offer of $33.95 for both the book and the DVD. To obtain this book and DVD, simply go to the homepage of our website, www.swpm.us. The website again is www.swpm.us. And please join us next week for another Last Days Beacon program brought to you by Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Until then, this is Dane Rome saying thanks for listening.